I never thought I'd hear those words from my daughter-in-law. If you don't help with the bills, you'll end up on the street. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. After 32 years of marriage to Noelle, the love of my life, I was left standing alone, not only in grief but in disbelief. When Noelle passed away, I thought things would be tough, of course, but I never imagined they would get worse, especially not at the hands of my own family. I've always been the one to give, whether it was for my children, my husband, or even Romy, my daughter-in-law. I thought the world would be different after Noelle's death. But Romy, who I had welcomed into our family with open arms, didn't see things the same way. The funeral had barely ended when the real shock came. Wade, my son, sat there, unable to look me in the eye. He was silent. And then, Romy spoke. Her words cut through the room like a knife. "Mom," she said, barely glancing at me. "You can't keep living here on your own. This house is too much for you. You'll have to sell it soon. Or, well, you'll have to find somewhere else to go." Those words stung. It wasn't just that I had lost my husband. It was the way they dismissed me, as though everything I had worked for, everything Noelle and I built together, didn't matter. They didn't see me as the mother who raised her son with love and sacrifice. They didn't see the woman who had spent decades helping to build this home. They saw me as a burden. And then, Romy dropped the bombshell. "If you don't help with the bills," she said, "you'll end up on the street. I can't have you living here if you're not contributing." I felt the weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. She had been the one to encourage Wade to spend less time with me, to minimize my role in their lives. She had been the one to push me aside when Noelle was still alive. But this was different. She was actively trying to erase me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had spent my whole life making sure my family was taken care of. I had given everything for them. And now, at my weakest moment, this was how they were repaying me. I felt a wave of anger rising in me, but I didn't show it. I just sat there, looking at them. The silence between us was deafening. Wade still hadn't said a word. His silence spoke volumes. He was no longer the boy who would climb into my lap when he was scared. He was a man, married, and it seemed that his loyalty now lay with his wife, not his mother. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood up slowly and walked out of the room, my heart breaking with every step. But deep inside, something shifted. I wasn't going to let them push me out like this. I wasn't going to be treated like I didn't matter. I was going to find a way to stand my ground. I didn't know how yet, but I would. I had to. I couldn't shake off the weight of Romy's words. It had been days since that conversation, but it felt like they were echoing in my mind, getting louder with every passing hour. I woke up to an empty house each morning, the silence pressing in on me, the absence of Noelle still so fresh it felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. I had never imagined this would be my reality. Alone, grieving, and now, pushed out of my own home. The house we had built together, the one we had raised our son in, was no longer a sanctuary. It was just a house, filled with cold air and empty rooms. I spent my days walking through it, touching the objects that once held so much meaning, now feeling like foreign things. The photographs on the walls, the old furniture we had lovingly restored together. It all felt so distant, so irrelevant to the people who were supposed to care for me. As I moved from room to room, I began to notice things I had ignored before. The faintest sounds of my footsteps on the hardwood floor, the way the house seemed to shift under the weight of my loneliness. I spent hours sitting in the kitchen, staring at the untouched breakfast I had prepared, wondering how it had come to this. I had always believed that family was everything. I had put my heart and soul into raising Wade, into being a good wife, and now, it seemed like I was nothing more than a burden. The truth was staring me in the face. They wanted me gone. It wasn't enough that I had lost Noelle. Now, they were trying to take everything else from me too. The realization hit me hard, but I didn't cry. I didn't allow myself that luxury. Instead, I started making plans. I wasn't sure what those plans would look like, but I was determined to do something. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let Romy and Wade strip away the last shred of dignity I had left. The next morning, I decided to take a walk. The weather was unseasonably warm for this time of year, the sun shining brightly as I made my way through the neighborhood. I had always loved the quiet of the mornings, the way the world seemed to wake up slowly, as if it too was recovering from the same loss I had felt. As I walked, I noticed the changes in the streets. The houses had been painted, new cars lined the driveways. It was as if everything was moving forward, but I was stuck, frozen in time. I passed a small park where children played, their laughter ringing through the air, and for a moment, I felt a pang of envy. They had everything ahead of them. They didn't have to worry about being discarded, being forgotten. The thought made my chest tighten, but I pushed it away. I couldn't afford to be weak. When I got back home, I sat down at the kitchen table and took a deep breath. It was time to act. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep going on like this, accepting their cruelty without a fight. I opened the drawer where I kept my important documents, my fingers brushing over the papers as I searched for something, anything, that might help me. My mind raced through possibilities, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them take this house. I wasn't going to let them take everything Noelle and I had built. The house was still mine. It was my home, and I had every right to stay here. As I sifted through the papers, I found what I was looking for, a letter from the bank, a document that might be my lifeline. It was a long shot, but it was something. A part of me knew that this wasn't going to be easy. Romy and Wade weren't going to give up without a fight, but I wasn't about to back down either. They thought I was weak, that I would just disappear quietly, but they were wrong. I wasn't going anywhere, not without a fight. The following days passed in a blur. Each morning, I would wake up and find myself staring at the empty chair beside me, where Noelle had once sat, his gentle smile greeting me as we started our day. Now, there was only silence. Wade hadn't said much after our last conversation. He seemed lost, like a man who didn't know where he belonged. But it wasn't just him. It was Romy too. She was distant, her kindness replaced by something colder, something calculated. The change had been so gradual that at first, I hadn't even noticed. But now it was clear. They were pushing me out, bit by bit. The house had once felt like a home, full of life and laughter. Now, it felt like a cage, every corner filled with memories of better times, times that seemed to belong to someone else. I spent my days pacing the halls, trying to find a place for myself in this new, uncomfortable reality. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I was being judged by the people who were supposed to love me. It wasn't just the way Romy spoke to me, it was the little things. The way she would arrange the furniture differently without asking. The way she'd make small decisions about the house without consulting me. It was as if I didn't matter anymore. I wasn't part of the family. I was just a guest. And then, one evening, things finally came to a head. I was sitting in the living room, trying to distract myself by reading a book, when Wade walked in. He looked at me, but his eyes didn't meet mine. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Mom, I think it's time you started looking for a new place. You can't stay here forever." The words stung, and I could feel my chest tighten. This was it, the final blow. They were ready to get rid of me. But I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there, staring at him, trying to keep my composure. After a few moments, I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. I wasn't going to cry, not now. Not in front of him. I walked slowly to the door, but before I could leave, I turned back and said, "You've made your choice, haven't you? You and Romy." Wade looked away, not meeting my gaze. "Mom, it's just what's best for everyone. You'll be fine. We'll help you find somewhere to go." The words were meant to comfort, but all they did was make the wound deeper. I left the room, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just been said. I knew they were trying to make it sound reasonable, make it sound like they were doing this for my own good. But I knew better. They weren't helping me. They were getting rid of me. The realization hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't about me being too old to live on my own. This was about them wanting my house, wanting everything Noelle and I had worked so hard for. I had spent years taking care of them, taking care of the house, the family. And now, when I needed them the most, they were throwing me out like yesterday's trash. I couldn't allow this. I wasn't going to just walk away and let them have everything. No, I had something they didn't expect, something they didn't know about. A piece of information that could turn everything around. The house, the memories, the years of my life. It wasn't going to be taken from me so easily. I had a plan. It wasn't a big plan, not yet, but it was a start. I was going to find a way to stand my ground, to take control back. And when the time came, I would make sure they knew just how wrong they were to underestimate me. The next few days felt like they were dragging on forever. I couldn't escape the weight of what had been said. Every time I passed by the kitchen, the living room, I was reminded of how different things had become. Wade and Romy were no longer pretending to be the family I had known. They had made it clear that I wasn't welcome here, that I was just an inconvenience to their plans. I spent my time reflecting on the life I had built with Noelle. The house, the memories, the way it had all seemed so permanent. But now, it was all slipping away. I had given so much of myself to my family over the years, and yet, in the end, I was left standing alone. But I wasn't going to just accept this. I couldn't. Romy and Wade had underestimated me, thinking I would simply pack up and leave. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not without a fight. I sat in the quiet of the living room one afternoon, the sun streaming in through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. It was peaceful, almost serene, but it felt out of place. I should have been enjoying this time, reflecting on my life with Noelle, but instead, I felt like an intruder in my own home. I had to act, and I knew it had to be soon. The first step was figuring out how to protect what was mine. Wade and Romy seemed to think they could just push me out of the house, that I would have no choice but to leave. But they were wrong. I had spent decades paying attention to the little things, the small details that seemed insignificant at the time, but could now be my saving grace. I began digging through old documents, contracts, and papers that Noelle and I had kept over the years. I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for, but I knew there had to be something that could help me hold on to the house. As I flipped through the papers, I found something that made my heart race. A deed to the property, signed by Noelle and myself. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me leverage. If I was going to fight for my home, this was the starting point. The next step was figuring out how to use it. Romy and Wade didn't know what they were up against. They thought they could take everything from me, but they hadn't realized that Noelle and I had made sure everything was in order. There were protections in place, things they didn't even know about. I wasn't going to just roll over and let them take what was rightfully mine. I began looking into my options. I knew I couldn't fight them alone, not without help. I reached out to a lawyer, someone who could guide me through the process and help me figure out how to use the deed to my advantage. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let Romy and Wade take the one thing that still meant something to me. As the days passed, I could feel the tension building. Romy and Wade were still acting like nothing was wrong, like they had already won. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. I wasn't going to let them erase me from my own life. It was time to take action, and I was ready. The days that followed were tense. I could feel the undercurrent of hostility every time I crossed paths with Romy and Wade. They still went about their lives, acting like they had all the time in the world to push me aside. But I wasn't blind to what they were doing. It was obvious now that they were making plans that didn't include me. I could hear the whispered conversations when I wasn't in the room, the way they avoided eye contact, the way Wade seemed to be in a constant state of discomfort. But Romy was the one who had changed the most. She had always been a bit cold, but now, she was almost cruel in her interactions with me. It was as if she had already decided that I no longer had a place in the family. She no longer spoke to me with the same fake sweetness she had in the past. Now, it was more like I was a stranger to her, someone who didn't deserve her time or attention. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like a battlefield. Every step I took, I could feel the tension in the air. I knew they were plotting something that would make it impossible for me to stay. I wasn't sure what, but I could feel it in my bones. I couldn't let them succeed. I needed to act fast. I spent the next few days focusing on the one thing that still gave me hope, the deed. I had seen it, and I knew it was my only leverage. It wasn't much, but it was something. I wasn't about to let them take the house without a fight. I had lived here for decades, and I wasn't going to let Romy and Wade strip it away from me without a struggle. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, and I needed to be smart about how I approached this. The next time I saw Romy, I decided to confront her. I couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. I had to know what they were planning, and I had to make sure she knew that I wasn't going to be pushed out so easily. I found her in the kitchen, standing by the counter, her back to me as she rummaged through the cabinets. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke. "Romy," I said, my voice calm but firm. She froze, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't turn around. But then she did, her eyes narrowing as she saw me standing there. "What do you want, Margaret?" she asked, her tone cold. I stood my ground, my heart racing in my chest. "I know what you and Wade are trying to do," I said, my voice unwavering. and I'm not going anywhere. Romy let out a sharp laugh, the sound harsh and bitter. You think you can stop us? She sneered. You're old, Margaret. You can't fight us. You don't even know what's coming. I felt a flicker of anger rise in me, but I forced it down. I wasn't going to let her get to me. You don't know what I'm capable of, I said quietly. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Romy's expression faltered for a moment, and I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But she quickly masked it, her smug smile returning. We'll see about that, she said, before turning back to the counter. I knew then that I had to keep moving forward, no matter what. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me. I wasn't going to let Romy and Wade take everything from me. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready. It had been a week since my conversation with Romy, and every day that passed made the walls of the house feel smaller, more suffocating. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and watch. As Romy and Wade tried to strip me of everything, the thought of losing the house, the place I had shared with Noelle, was too much to bear. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I had to act carefully. I couldn't show any signs of weakness. The house was still mine, and I wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. I spent the following days researching everything I could about property rights, wills, and legal protections. I contacted a lawyer, someone I could trust to guide me through this mess. The lawyer was sharp, efficient, and listened to me, which was exactly what I needed. We reviewed all the documents, and as I expected, there were provisions in place to ensure that I had a right to the house. But the law wasn't enough on its own. Romy and Wade had already shown how far they were willing to go. I needed to find a way to hit them where it would hurt, without giving them the chance to retaliate. The lawyer gave me a plan, one that would require patience and careful execution. I couldn't rush this. It was a waiting game now. The next few days were filled with tension. I could feel Romy and Wade growing more confident in their plan, thinking I was just an old woman too beaten down by grief to fight back. They thought they had already won. I knew better. I kept my distance from them, only engaging when necessary, keeping my movements subtle. I spent my time preparing, making sure every step I took would be calculated. I began to notice small things that I had overlooked before. The way Romy had started making decisions about the house, as though it were already hers. The way Wade barely acknowledged me anymore, as though I had become an invisible presence in his life. Every time they passed me in the hall, their eyes would flicker away quickly, as though they didn't want to face me. It was a clear sign. They knew I was a threat, but they underestimated me. I wasn't some helpless old woman waiting to be pushed aside. I had spent decades building a life, and I wasn't about to let them tear it apart without a fight. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the old oak tree in the backyard. It was a tree Noelle had planted when we first moved in, and it had grown tall and strong over the years, just like our life together. The breeze was soft, and the sun was starting to set, casting a warm glow over everything. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering Noelle standing next to me under that very tree, his arm around my shoulder. Those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I had to hold on to them. They were all I had left. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let them take this from me. I wasn't going to let Romy and Wade think they could push me out. I had already started the process. I had the legal documents in hand, and I knew exactly what steps I needed to take next. I couldn't do it alone, but I wasn't alone. I had a lawyer, and I had the truth on my side. The next day, I made the call. I was going to make my move, and when I did, Romy and Wade would realize just how wrong they were to think they could take everything from me. The days seemed to stretch on, each one feeling heavier than the last. The house, once full of warmth and life, now felt like a cold, silent tomb. I could sense the distance growing between Romy, Wade, and myself, the air thick with unspoken words and hidden agendas. It had become impossible to ignore the tension, but I had learned to adapt. I had to. Romy and Wade thought they could push me aside, thinking I was too weak, too fragile to stand up for myself. But they were wrong. Every step I had taken over the past few weeks had been calculated, deliberate. I wasn't going to let them take the house, my home, without a fight. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, and that's when I reached out to someone who might finally be able to give me the leverage I needed. Martin, Noelle's old lawyer. I had been avoiding this for days, but I realized it was the only way. I needed to know my rights, and I needed to be sure I had everything in place before I made my next move. When I met with Martin, I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. The office was quiet, just the soft tapping of his keyboard filling the space as he pulled up the documents we needed. He was kind, but businesslike, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was finally listening to me. He looked over the papers, glancing up at me every now and then, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words were like a weight lifting off my chest. "You're in a good position, Margaret. Noelle made sure everything was in order. You have a solid case. Romy and Wade are trying to rush this, but you're protected." It was all I needed to hear. I wasn't alone in this fight. There was a path forward, one that could protect everything Noelle and I had worked so hard for. But as Martin continued to explain the legal steps, I couldn't help but think of Romy and Wade. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had the upper hand, but they had no idea just how wrong they were. I left the meeting feeling more determined than ever. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about standing my ground, showing Romy and Wade that I wasn't the weak, frail woman they thought I was. I was their mother and mother-in-law, and I had every right to be here. I wasn't going to let them strip away my dignity, my memories, and everything I had built with Noelle. That night, I sat in the living room, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I stared at the photos of Noelle and me, the memories of our life together, and I knew that I couldn't let go of this. I couldn't let them take it. The next morning, I put my plan into motion. I wasn't sure how Romy and Wade would react, but I knew one thing. I was ready for whatever came next. They had underestimated me, and that was their biggest mistake. It was time to show them just how wrong they were. The days after my meeting with Martin passed in a blur of preparation. I wasn't sure exactly when Romy and Wade would make their next move, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to force me out. The feeling of being constantly on edge began to wear me down. I had spent so many years living in this house, a place filled with memories of Noelle, and now it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. But the more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to lose it. Not without a fight. Romy and Wade had made a mistake. They thought I was weak, that I was just some old woman who would roll over and let them have their way. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. The more I reflected on it, the clearer it became. They had no real understanding of what I was capable of, and they had underestimated me. I had spent my whole life making sacrifices for my family, putting their needs before my own, and now, when I needed them the most, they were trying to push me aside. They didn't realize that Noelle and I had built this life together, brick by brick, and I wasn't about to let them tear it down. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet. Romy and Wade seemed more confident, more sure of themselves, and that made me even more determined to keep my plan to myself. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had gotten to me. I kept my head down, focusing on the details that would make all the difference when the time came. But as I watched them, I could see the cracks starting to show. Romy had always been the more confident of the two, but now, I saw something in her that made me question whether she truly believed in her own victory. She was still pretending like everything was fine, but the small, subtle changes in her behavior told me otherwise. She was starting to doubt. Wade, on the other hand, was more withdrawn. He barely spoke to me anymore, his guilt written all over his face. He was caught between loyalty to his wife and the nagging feeling that what they were doing to me wasn't right. It was becoming clear that they weren't as united as they thought they were. I couldn't afford to waste time. The first part of my plan was to get everything in order, and that meant making sure my legal standing was solid. I didn't want any surprises, especially not from Romy and Wade. So, I kept in touch with Martin, making sure all the paperwork was in place. Martin reassured me that everything was moving in the right direction, but I knew I had to act quickly. One afternoon, after I had finished another long session with Martin, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the documents in front of me. They were all signed, ready to be used when the time came. I thought about Noelle and the life we had built. I thought about how hard we had worked to make this house our home. It was ours. I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. I stood up, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be obstacles along the way, but I was ready. I wasn't going to be bullied into giving up what was mine. The next step was going to be the hardest one, but I had to do it. I couldn't let Romy and Wade get away with this. I wasn't going to be their victim. Not anymore. The morning of the big confrontation arrived faster than I had anticipated. I had spent so many days quietly preparing, keeping my cards close to my chest, that when it was finally time to put my plan into action, I felt a surge of nervous energy. The house felt different today, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I wasn't sure how Romy and Wade would react, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. The legal papers were in my hands, ready to be presented at the right moment. I had everything I needed. I had gone over the details with Martin multiple times, ensuring every aspect was solid. There would be no mistake. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing Romy and Wade that I wasn't someone they could push around. I wasn't going to let them erase me from this place, from this life. I went about my day as usual, but my mind kept racing. Romy and Wade were still oblivious to what was coming. They had no idea that I was ready, that I had everything I needed to make a stand. I could feel the tension building in the house. Romy had been acting even colder than usual, and Wade seemed to be avoiding me completely. It was as if they both knew something was about to happen, though they didn't know exactly what. The afternoon passed slowly. I watched the clock, counting down the minutes until I could finally confront them. I had to be calm, composed, and strategic. I couldn't let my emotions take over. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, I knew the time had come. I had waited long enough. I walked into the living room where Romy and Wade were sitting on the couch, talking in hushed tones. When they saw me, both of them fell silent, their eyes darting to each other. The silence hung between us like a heavy weight, thick with unspoken words. I took a deep breath and spoke first, my voice steady and firm. "I know what you've been planning," I said, my gaze fixed on Romy. She stiffened, but didn't respond. Wade shifted in his seat, his discomfort written all over his face. "You can't just push me out of this house," I continued. "I'm not going anywhere. Not without a fight." Romy gave a small, sarcastic laugh, as if she had heard this before. "Oh, really? And what are you going to do about it?" she asked, her tone dripping with contempt. "You're old, Margaret. You're not in a position to fight anyone." I didn't flinch. Instead, I pulled the papers from my bag and set them down on the table in front of them. "I don't think you understand what's at stake here," I said, watching their faces carefully. Romy and Wade exchanged a look, their arrogance faltering just a bit. I could see the doubt creeping into their eyes. They hadn't expected me to be prepared. Romy reached for the papers, her fingers trembling slightly as she glanced at the legal documents. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. "This is the deed to the house," I replied, "and everything in it is legally mine. You can't just take it away from me, no matter how much you want to." The room fell into a stunned silence. Romy looked at Wade, her expression shifting from confidence to uncertainty. She clearly hadn't expected me to be in such a strong position. "You've been making moves behind my back, thinking I wouldn't notice," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "But I'm not as blind as you think I am." Wade opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was pale, and for the first time in a long while, he looked unsure of himself. Romy, however, recovered quickly, her defiant attitude returning. "You think this is going to change anything?" she spat, slamming the papers back onto the table. "You're still old. You still don't have anywhere else to go." I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "That's where you're wrong," I said softly. "You've underestimated me. You thought I would just let you walk all over me. But I'm not going anywhere. And if you think you can just push me out of this house, you've got another thing coming." Romy and Wade sat there in stunned silence, the weight of my words settling in. I could see the shift in them, the crack in their facade. They had expected me to be weak, to crumble under the pressure. But they had no idea what I was capable of. I wasn't going to back down, and they could see that now. The game had changed. And this time, I was the one in control. The tension in the room hung thick as Romy and Wade processed the weight of my words. For the first time, there was uncertainty in their eyes, a flicker of doubt that I had never seen before. Romy's confident smirk had faded, and now she seemed almost unsure. I could feel the change, the shift in the balance of power, and I knew I had them where I wanted them. Wade, though still silent, seemed to shrink into himself, as if he were realizing the full extent of what was happening. It had all been so calculated, so planned out on their end, but now the table had turned. They had expected me to be passive, to give up easily, but I wasn't the woman they thought I was. "You're playing a dangerous game, Margaret," Romy finally said, her voice a little less certain than before. "You think these papers are going to save you?" Her tone was almost mocking, but I could see the edge in it, the fear creeping in. This house was never just about the deed, I replied, keeping my voice calm but firm. It's about everything Noelle and I built here. The memories, the life we shared. You can't just erase that. There was a moment of silence as Romy looked away, her gaze flickering to Wade, who still hadn't said a word. I could tell he was struggling, torn between his wife and what was right. The guilt was eating at him, and I wasn't sure how long he could keep pretending it wasn't there. You really think you can keep us out of here? Romy pressed, her voice rising slightly. Do you really think you have any chance against us? It's not about a chance, I said, my voice steady now. It's about standing up for myself. For what's mine. What I've earned. Romy laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're old, Margaret, she said, her words sharp. You don't have the strength to fight this battle. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything settle on my shoulders, but I stood taller. You don't know me, I said simply. I've lived through far worse than this. The confidence in my voice seemed to surprise her. Romy faltered for a moment, her eyes narrowing, but I saw a flicker of doubt in her expression. She wasn't as sure of herself as she had been before. You can't fight this alone. Wade finally spoke up, his voice low and strained. We're your family. Why are you making this so hard? The question hung in the air, and I could feel the years of frustration and pain in it. Wade wasn't wrong. We were family. But family shouldn't treat each other like this. Family doesn't abandon each other when things get tough, I said softly, looking directly at him. I raised you, Wade. I loved you. And now, when I need you, this is how you repay me. His eyes wavered for a moment, and for just a second, I saw the son I had raised. But then, just as quickly, the walls went back up, and he turned away. Romy stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. Enough, she snapped. You've made your point. But it's too late. This is happening, whether you like it or not. I stood my ground, refusing to show any weakness. You think it's too late, but it's not. I'm not going anywhere. And I will fight you every step of the way. The room was heavy with the tension of our confrontation. Romy's face was flushed with anger, but I could see the uncertainty creeping in. Wade, on the other hand, just stood there, his face blank, but I could feel the guilt in his silence. The silence between us stretched, thick and uncomfortable, but I didn't break it. I wasn't the one who had to apologize. They were. And when the time came, I would make sure they knew exactly what they had done. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them take this from me. And in that moment, I realized something that gave me strength. I had nothing to lose anymore. I had been through too much, and I wasn't about to let them walk all over me. Not now, not ever. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, simmering tension. Romy and Wade seemed to retreat into their own world, as though they thought I was just going to disappear into the background. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not after everything I had fought for. I could feel their eyes on me, though they did their best to avoid acknowledging me directly. They were testing me, seeing how far they could push before I broke. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I wasn't going to let them win. The house felt emptier with every passing day, but the silence was no longer peaceful. It was oppressive, suffocating, like a storm waiting to break. I spent my days in a kind of quiet focus, carefully watching Romy and Wade, analyzing their every move. They were still pretending like they had all the power, but I knew the truth now. The tables had turned, and they didn't even realize it. I had been patient. I had let them believe they had the upper hand, but now it was time to act. I had everything in place. I had all the evidence I needed, and I wasn't going to back down. The next confrontation came sooner than I expected. Romy had made a subtle attempt to go through some of Noelle's old things, as if she were already planning her next move. I had caught her rifling through some of the paperwork in the office one evening. When I walked in, she quickly closed the drawer, her face flushed with guilt. Looking for something? I asked, my voice calm but sharp. Romy didn't answer right away. She just stood there, her back stiff, eyes avoiding mine. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally said, her tone cold but not as convincing as she probably intended. I wasn't in the mood for games anymore. It's time for you to understand something, Romy, I said, taking a step closer. This house is mine, and I will fight for it. Her expression shifted, the arrogance replaced with a flicker of uncertainty. You're crazy if you think you can stop this, she snapped, trying to regain her composure. But I could see the cracks. I could feel her confidence beginning to crumble. It's not about stopping anything, I said quietly. It's about standing up for what's right. Romy laughed, but it wasn't the triumphant laugh of someone in control. It was a nervous, almost defeated sound. You're just an old woman with nothing left to lose, she said, trying to sound confident. What are you going to do, Margaret? Fight us all the way to the courthouse? I took another step toward her, my eyes locking onto hers. You might be right. I might not have much left, but I have my dignity, and I'll hold on to that with everything I have. Romy took a step back, but I could tell she was losing her grip. Her composure was slipping, and the panic was starting to show through. I had her right where I wanted her. Wade appeared in the doorway, watching the interaction unfold. He hadn't spoken much since our last confrontation, but now he seemed like he was waiting for the right moment to intervene. What's going on here? He asked, his voice low. We're having a conversation, I said, turning to face him. It's about time you two understood what's really at stake. Wade stepped into the room, but his posture was stiff, like he wasn't sure whether to step in or not. Margaret, I think we've all said enough for now, he said, trying to defuse the situation. Maybe we should just— No, I cut him off. It's time for the truth to come out. You both have been making moves behind my back, and I'm done being the one who stays silent. This house is mine, and I won't let you take it from me. The tension was palpable, and for a moment, I thought Wade might say something else, but he remained silent. Romy's face was flushed with anger, but now, I could see the cracks in her demeanor, the doubt creeping in. The facade was breaking, and I wasn't going to stop until it was completely gone. You've made a mistake, I said quietly, and I'm going to make sure you understand just how wrong you were to think you could take everything from me. The room was still. Romy and Wade exchanged a glance, and for the first time, I could see the fear in their eyes. They had underestimated me, and now, it was too late to turn back. The game had changed, and this time, I was the one in control.